Let's go ahead and build up the aggregate demand curve first. It shows the output of goods and services, real GDP, which is demanded at different price levels. And this is going to be something that's important for us because we now hit the two main variables we are interested in. We're taking a look at output, which is real GDP, and we're also taking a look at price levels here. So there's a price and output sort of relationship that's going to develop between aggregate demand, as we sort of seen with regular demand as well. So here we just want to go ahead, write that down, just to get it in the back of our minds to ensure that we know for sure what aggregate demand is all about. So aggregate demand. So aggregate demand, as you see, it's just going to show us a relationship between real GDP and different price levels. So the output of goods and services, which is real GDP, demanded at different price levels. Demanded at different price levels. So here, anytime we talk about aggregate demand, we're focused in on all the final goods and final services that this country is going to be producing. So real GDP in this instance. We're not focused just on one good or one service. We're focused in on all the goods and all the services. So what shape do you think our aggregate demand curve is going to look like? What type of relationship should there be between output and price levels? Not surprisingly, it's going to take the same shape as a typical demand curve that we saw back in chapter number 3, which is a downward sloping line. So here we have the price level on the vertical axis, and then we have aggregate output or GDP on the horizontal axis. And we have a downward sloping line. The higher the price level, the less real GDP there's going to be, and the lower the price level, the higher the real GDP is going to be. So the law of demand still holds in this instance. So a higher aggregate price causes lower aggregate output and vice versa. So here, as we move from point A to point B, we have higher price levels. It's going to cause lower aggregate output. However, we are a little bit interested in seeing why our demand curve is going to be downward sloping here. And there are three different reasons why our aggregate demand curve slopes downward. So here we take a look at the wealth effect, the export price effect, and then the interest rate effect. And all three of these effects all combine with one another to show us exactly why we have a downward sloping line. And we need to go ahead and take a closer look at each one of these effects. So here, just keep in the back of your mind, as we move from point A to point B, it's going to show us exactly why we have this downward sloping line. In this instance, once again, when we start off by taking a look at a movement along the demand curve, in this case the aggregate demand curve, we're going to be shocking the aggregate price level first. So here we are taking a look at the current price level of all the goods and services in this instance, which is why it's a movement along the demand curve and not a shift of the entire aggregate demand curve. So in all these examples right here, we're going to go ahead and move from point A to point B. We're going to increase the price level first in each three of these effects. So here, the question that we want to go ahead and start asking is, why does our aggregate demand curve slope downwards? So why does our AD curve slope downwards? Slope downwards. So here, the first one that we can take a look at is going to be known as the wealth effect. Wealth effect. And the wealth effect is exactly that. It describes how rich you feel. So it describes how rich you feel. So do you feel very wealthy or do you not feel so wealthy? So in this instance, as we said before, the very first shock that we're going to introduce is a rising price level. So prices are increasing. There's some type of inflation happening within the economy. So here we have a rising price level. So if a rising price level happens, if we have inflation within this particular economy, do you feel more wealthy or do you feel less wealthy? You're going to feel less wealthy in this instance because we've already talked about this. Why? If we have inflation happening within the economy, it means your purchasing power has declined. So it means purchasing power decreases. And if purchasing power decreases, that just tells us that you're going to be able to buy fewer goods and fewer services for the same amount of money, which is going to reduce output demanded. Reducing output demanded. demanded. So here, wealth effect, a rising price level means purchasing power decreases, reducing output demanded. So as we go from point A to point B, hey, this is exactly one of the reasons why we see our aggregate demand curve sloping downwards. Number two is going to be the export price effect. So here we take a look at the export price effect. Export price effect. And we really haven't talked about international sort of things all too often within this course, but we'll gradually get into it in the next few chapters. So here, the export price effect just tells us exactly what happens to US competitiveness when our price levels rises. So do foreigners want to buy more of our goods, or do foreigners want to buy fewer of our goods? So once again, start off with a rising price level. So here, move this down just a little. So suppose that when US price levels increase. So when US price levels increase or rise. So once again, we're saying that there's some type of inflation happening within the economy first. When this happens, American goods inherently become more expensive because, hey, there's inflation. So the price of everything essentially has increased. So American goods become more expensive. American goods become more expensive. More expensive. If American goods become more expensive, that means our competitiveness has actually gone down worldwide. So if you have a choice between buying US goods or foreign goods, you want to go ahead and buy more foreign goods because foreign goods are seen as cheaper compared to American goods. So in this instance, when we have higher prices, that's not going to be good for our exports. So higher prices mean that US goods are less competitive. Means that US or American goods are less competitive compared to foreign goods. So here, prices have increased. US goods are less competitive compared to foreign goods. So what happens to our exports? So US exports go down. US exports decline. So here, the amount of goods and services that we send abroad have gone down because we are not as competitive as before. People are going to want to go ahead and buy more foreign or international goods and services instead. And because our exports go down, and also inherently the imports go up, it tells us that quantity demanded is going to decline. Quantity demanded declines, and results in lower real output. Results in lower real output, or GDP. So in this instance, once again, we're hitting a reason as we move from point A to point B, we notice that, hey, there's going to be a negative relationship between the price levels and real GDP. And then finally here, the last effect that ties everything together is going to be the interest rate effect. So here, take a look at the interest rate effect. And once again, with the interest rate effect, we're taking a look at what happens when the interest rates are going to, how are interest rates going to be affecting our real output when the price level changes. So as we've sort of mentioned several times throughout the semester, interest rates are just the prices that you need to pay in order to use money. So here, once again, just for review, interest rates are prices paid for the use of money. Are prices paid for the use of money. So if we want to go ahead and use some type of money, we typically have to borrow money from a bank. We'll be paying some type of interest rate on that. So let's see what happens when the when the price level is going to change. It's going to increase once again. So always starting off with the initial shock right here. So as the price level increases, so once again, starting off with our shock right here, what does this mean for you as an individual? Do you think you're going to need more money or less money in order to conduct your everyday transactions? You're going to go ahead and need more money to do your everyday activities. People need more money for transactions. for transactions. So once again, there's some type of inflation happening within the economy. So the price of, say, gasoline goes from $2 to $2.50. So your $2 can no longer buy you the same amount of gasoline. So therefore, you need more money in order to buy goods and services. Anytime you need more money or need some more of anything, that's going to cause an increase in demand. So demand for money goes up. So here, there is an entire market for money. We call this loanable funds. Formally, we'll take a closer look at that later on. But the demand for money is going to increase as the price level increases. And as we just saw right here, interest rates are the prices paid for the usage of money. Anytime we have an increase in demand for any good or service, we notice that the price is going to increase. So here, the price for money increases, and the price for money is the interest rate. So interest rate also increases. However, when interest rates increase, that's going to cause a ripple effect within the entire economy, most notably on business investment. Business investment. Remember, we said that businesses, they don't like very high interest rates because the vast majority of their projects are going to be sort of undertaken only because they have to borrow money from banks. They don't have enough money on hand, so they have to borrow money from banks in order to undertake some type of project. So here, the higher the interest rates go, business investment is going to be lower. So that just increases the cost of them undertaking any type of particular project. And when business investment goes down, quantity demanded for real GDP, not a surprise in this instance, quantity demanded for real GDP is going to go down. So in all three of these impacts, the final result is, hey, we notice that quantity demanded for real GDP goes down. So all three of these effects tie into one another. They all combine: the interest rate effect, the wealth effect, and also the export price effect. These are all three reasons why our aggregate demand curve is going to be downward sloping. And of course, it can occur. We can go ahead and change it to the opposite case as well. What happens if the price level actually decreases as we move from B to A? We just want to go ahead and shift everything to the opposite case, and you'll still get the same conclusions from that. So knowing what we know about these three effects right here and why our aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, we can get into the more in-depth analysis with what actually shifts our aggregate demand curve over to the right, away from the origin, or to the left towards the origin, just like what we did in chapter number 3. I'll see you guys for that exciting video next.